But I'm not coming forward for any patriotic causes, but I'm coming forward only because of Mr. Joe West himself.
Who has threatened you, Jim?
I have been threatened by both organized crime and by the government.
Can you identify the people of the government who threatened you?
I wouldn't do that because I've never given up anyone in my life, and I won't start now. If they wish to kill me, then I have to accept the fate that comes with it. But
John F. Kennedy's assassination still sits at the center of America's biggest modern mystery, the kind that instantly brings up Dealey Plaza, the Zapruder film, Lee Harvey Oswald, and that stubborn question that never goes away. Was there more than one shooter? And no spot has stayed more charged than the Grassy Knoll, where some witnesses believed the shots came from the front. Today, we're focusing on one of the most controversial claims tied to that location by digging into what James E. Files said on camera in the documentary Confessions of an Assassin. Files, also known as James Sutton, claimed he was one of the shooters and that he fired from behind the fence near the knoll. We're going to walk through what he alleged, how the interview was presented, and why many researchers and authorities dismiss his story, even as others keep resurfacing it whenever the JFK debate heats up again. The tip that started it. In 1989, a Houston private investigator named Joe West began his own long-shot hunt for answers about JFK's killing, pushing through years of dead ends until a tip supposedly came from an FBI agent who wanted to remain unnamed. That trail led West to Joliet and then to an inmate, James E. Files, who was serving time for shooting an Illinois police officer. West's approach, according to the documentary framing, was slow and patient, built on repeated visits and letters rather than a single dramatic interrogation.
On November 22nd, 1963, I was in Dealey Plaza. I arrived at Dealey Plaza shortly before 10 a.m. that morning.
What was your reason for being there?
My reason for being there at that point was to look the area over, and I had driven a vehicle down there, and I had taken several weapons to Dallas, Texas.
For what purpose did you do this?
I did this for the sole purpose for the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
The documentary says West died in 1993 just as Files was nearing what the filmmakers call a full confession. 13 months later, on March 22nd, 1994, West's associates recorded Files on video, and that tape is presented as the core unedited confession, with the breaks described as natural pauses during filming rather than content edits. From the beginning, Files portrays himself not as a lone gunman, but as a small piece in a larger operation, with intermediaries and a chain of introductions, which sets up the two big questions: what he claims he did in Dallas, and what parts of his story can actually be checked against known facts. Files' backstory and his claimed connections.
I do this at that time. We were working a special operations group to work with the Latosian Army in Laos at that time, and I was there strictly as an advisor on training with small automatic weapons, setting detonators, explosives, mechanical ambushes.
Files tells a life story that deliberately blends military service, underworld proximity, and intelligence world name-dropping. In the interview, he claims he served in the 82nd Airborne, shipped out in 1959, and did work in Laos focused on small weapons training, detonators, explosives, and ambush tactics. He also says he later operated around anti-Castro Cuban activity in Florida, alleging that weapons and support came, quote, basically from the government, the CIA, and that David Atlee Phillips acted as his controller. From there, he describes slipping into organized crime through a strangely ordinary doorway, stock car racing. In his telling, Charles Nicoletti noticed him, tested him, and began using him as a driver on jobs, with Files portraying Nicoletti as a high-level hitman connected to the Chicago outfit. He then stacks the narrative with familiar names, including Nicoletti, Johnny Roselli, and Sam Giancana, all while keeping one theme steady the whole time. He presents himself as the helper, not the architect, a guy who followed orders, handled logistics, and could always retreat to, I only knew my assignment. Planning Dallas, mapping the route, choosing the knoll. Files lays out a timeline that starts months before Dallas, claiming an early plan was first aimed at Chicago and then shifted once the schedule pointed towards Texas. In his version, he drove down a week early in a 1963 Chevrolet, retrieved weapons from storage, stayed in Mesquite, and waited for the rest of the pieces to arrive. He says Lee Harvey Oswald visited him at the motel, took him out to test fire weapons, helped him learn the streets, and assisted with escape route familiarity, while also insisting they never directly discussed killing Kennedy. He then leans into the morning of logistics, claiming he picked up Roselli, drove to Fort Worth, met a man named Roselli identified as Jack Ruby, and watched an envelope change hands. Files says the envelope contained Secret Service identification and a map of the motorcade route through Dealey Plaza. And he points to the famous turn as the key moment that created an opportunity that, quote, should have never existed, at least in his telling.
And he asked me, he says, where would you, he said, whereas it goes outside, if you was to be outside here, he said, where would you position yourself at in Dealey Plaza? And I told him, I said, from looking everything over and from walking in the week that I've been down here, I said, I think I would choose up there behind the tree behind that stockade fence on the high ridge by the knoll up there.
In the interview, he frames the knoll position as practical camouflage. He says the railroad yard behind him offered a place to stash what he needed and blend in as a worker, with a natural escape path through the yards and parking areas. He also claims Nicoletti's best spot was a building he calls the Daltig, or Daltech, linking his story to the broader idea of crossfire from multiple angles. He then describes using a briefcase to conceal what he calls the fireball, setting it up so he could wait until the limo turned onto Elm before pulling the weapon. Whether you believe him or not, the story is built for cinematic clarity. Recon the plaza, pick positions, stash the case, wait for the turn, and fire at the last possible instant. The shot, the weapon, and the teeth mark calling card.
And when I got to the point where I thought it would be the last field of fire, I had zeroed in to the left side of the head there that I had, because if I waited any longer, then Jacqueline Kennedy would have been in the line of fire. And I'd been instructed for nothing to happen to her. And at that moment, I figured this is my last chance for a shot, and he still had not been hit in the head. So as I fired that round, Mr. Nicoletti and I had fired approximately at the same time as the hit started forward, then it went backward.
Files claims that as the motorcade rolled down Elm, shots began from behind, and he assumed Nicoletti fired first. He describes Kennedy reacting to body hits, then says he took what he believed was a final window for a headshot without risking Jacqueline Kennedy, claiming he fired almost simultaneously with Nicoletti's shot landing a fraction of a second earlier and changing the way his own shot struck. He then gets specific about the weapon, saying he used a Remington XP-100 Fireball, a scoped single-shot bolt-action pistol firing a .221 or modified .222 round, more like a cut-down rifle than a typical handgun. He claims the ammunition was specially prepared with a mercury load, gives a velocity of about 3,100 feet per second, and insists he only had time for one shot. Afterward, Files highlights the infamous casing detail, claiming he put the spent casing in his mouth, bit it, and placed it on the stockade fence as a signature, later tying it to a researcher's chain of custody. He then describes a calm exit, reversing his jacket, putting on a cap, carrying a briefcase like a businessman, meeting up with Nicoletti and Roselli, swapping cars near an underpass and gas station, and returning to Mesquite to clean up, resecure weapons, and drive back north while traveling only in daylight to avoid police stops. Why many reject the confession. Even in the documentary, the story never gets a clean endorsement. The film says judgment is left to the viewer, and it also notes that the FBI dismissed Files' confession as not credible, which creates a sharp gap between a dramatic narrative and an official evaluation. Outside the interview, Files is known for his 1991 Illinois conviction for attempted murder after a roadside shootout involving police, and he was later paroled in May 2016, a history that makes some viewers think he had proximity to violence, while others see every claim as self-serving. Writers split the same way, with Vincent Bugliosi dismissing him while conspiracy-oriented authors argue he sounds believable. And that divide only grows because Files has repeated versions of his account for years, while skeptics point to contradictions, weak corroboration, and the fact that the confession arrived decades after 1963 through intermediaries, not through contemporaneous evidence. In the end, the confession persists because it's a tidy, highly cinematic package that plugs straight into the public image of the Grassy Knoll. Now it's time to hear from you. When you listen to James Files describe the Grassy Knoll, the weapon, and the getaway, does it sound like a genuine insider account, or does it feel like a story built to fit the conspiracy template? And why?